Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor.
Yeah. Well, it's not a dispute. I mean, that's sitting in an escrow, and depending upon whether or not we decide to continue with our appeal, we could walk away and the whole thing be done. On the other hand, when you have a case where there were no investor harm, no investors lost any money, you're kind of like, wait, like why are we here? And it really goes back to Gary Gensler fighting a fight that was about power grab, that was about overreach of the bureaucracy to try to take a new industry. That what we're seeing now happen in Washington is smart legislation will come forward. You're seeing that happen with stablecoins in real time. I think you'll have a market structure bill, is what it's described as, to provide clarity and rules for the SEC and CFTC.
Today, it was announced that Ripple has officially won the case. Brad Garlinghouse came on Bloomberg to discuss the nuances of the case, and the SEC has officially dropped the case. Ripple has moved from the defense to the offense. They were supposed to pay a sum of $100+ million to the SEC. And now, since Ripple is on the offense, they could get their money back. Now, they could just walk away at this moment, or they could take it a step further and try to get their money back. The beauty of trying to get their money back is they could probably get their money back plus damages. And this would scare politicians from trying to hurt the crypto industry in any way, because there would be accountability.
Well, I mean, at this point, all we're fighting for is, do we want to fight to get the $125 million back? And look, I'll be honest, would I have walked away from that before they appealed, before President Trump put Paul Atkins and Scott Bessent and David Sachs as critical, key, very smart leaders in this industry to bring this industry back on shore? I would have walked away. Now you look at that, you're like, this case in this SEC never would have been brought. And so where we find ourselves is, great, there's a clear legal victory to say XRP is not a security. That was good for the industry. But there's pieces of it that we think could be kind of cleaned up. And the question is, do we want to fight that fight, or can we come to an agreement with the SEC to drop everything?
The good news is already baked in. The million-dollar question is, will Ripple appeal this in order to clarify and crystallize everything for the entire industry? I think it's pretty safe to assume that they will do that, but the good news is already here. The SEC has given up, and they're no longer on the offense.
Well, so XRP was named by the president on Truth Social. He posted something saying that there should be other tokens, that there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve and then a crypto stockpile that would include things like XRP.
Days later, the executive order didn't include it. Why was that?
I don't know what specifically was in the executive order. My understanding is there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. There'll be a crypto stockpile representing other cryptos. And I would expect that will include XRP. Look, at the end of the day, I think the stark contrast is, in the Biden administration, we couldn't get a meeting with people at the White House. Now we're welcomed into the White House. And that's just a massive change. I think we want this industry to thrive in the United States. We don't want to push it offshore where you have fewer regulations.
In my last video, I may have conflated the stockpile with the strategic reserve, and I apologize for that. Garlinghouse is saying that there will be the strategic reserve as well as a stockpile of digital assets, and it will be funded by law enforcement. So law enforcement seizes all these different crypto assets. And every day I search for key terms, including XRP, and I'll find Department of Justice say that they've freezed millions of dollars worth of XRP as well as other coins. So it's safe to assume that as law enforcement freezes this, a portion of it will go to the stockpile of digital assets.
One more on the stockpile.
Yeah.
How much XRP would be in it? Where does it come from?
Well, my understanding of what I read about I think there are some questions, and that the devil may be in the details as Treasury implements some of this.
Absolutely in the details.
But my understanding is that the stockpile will be represented by seized other cryptos other than Bitcoin that then will be in that stockpile. So to the extent that various law enforcement agencies have seized cryptos, which would include XRP, that those would go into the stockpile in addition to the Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's my understanding.
And someone in the comments last video mentioned that XMR, Monero, is probably one of the largest holdings, considering that it is the choice of people that like to circumvent the law. And he may have a point there. Around half of the supply of XRP is in escrow for the development of the XRP ecosystem. With strategic reserves, trade wars, everything that's happening in the global market, I find the tokenomics to be very interesting for XRP. And I've stated this before that I think at one point Ripple gifts the escrow to the United States of America, or if they spend it, that's taxable revenue for the United States. So we're going to see this ecosystem flourish.
So I have immense confidence on the ETF. I think there's 11 different filings pending with the SEC to launch ETFs, from everybody from Bitwise to Franklin Templeton and a whole bunch of people in between. I think those will be live in the second half of this year. We have seen, even outside the United States, you have live ETPs. And at a time when a lot of outflows are exiting some of the crypto ETFs, you're seeing inflows into XRP. And I think that's because you had this false negative pressure from the SEC, this kind of, an exogenous hand holding things down that's now being released. And that's great for the market. It's great for builders within the XRP ecosystem globally.
When you look at XRP's charts, the technicals show that it broke above resistance and is hovering over the previous area of support, which is extremely bullish. HBAR, Algorand, XLM, they all have very similar looking charts. And with all of the good news and the ETFs coming in, it's not hard to believe.
I think the Trump family is very supportive of crypto, which is great. It's completely different from the environment we had been in. Our view on meme coins, we're not as focused on them. We would not be putting them into our various private funds because, and I think that the combination of AI and blockchain technology is creating millions of these meme coins. We think most of them are not going to be worth very much. We think there are just going to be a few crypto assets that will gain most of the spoils in the entire ecosystem.
It's not a coincidence that the utility coins have the best looking technicals and meme coins and other assets are completely hammered. Policy choices are going to shape this tokenized economies, and protocols with utility are going to benefit greatly. They're going to have enormous amounts of wealth hosted on these protocols and paired to their native tokens. Whole economies growing in the digital world and open and available to everybody. That's the true power of crypto, and that's where the utility comes into play.
We wouldn't be surprised to see 2 or 3 cuts. Now, if you look at an indicator called Trueflation, it's probably the broadest measure of inflation out there. It is saying inflation is down to 1.65%, well below where the Fed is pinning it at roughly the CPI's 2.8%. And we believe that the combination of actually food prices have started coming down, even egg prices have started to collapse. As a matter of fact, gasoline prices are coming down. We're seeing some rent prices coming down. So we think inflation is going to surprise on the low side of expectations for those reasons, and because innovation is inherently deflationary. And our 5 innovation platforms are all driving different kinds of deflation, good deflation, which we'll call unit growth, but deflation nonetheless. So we think the Fed is going to have many more degrees of freedom in the second half of this year than most people think. We could see more than the number I just suggested, 2 to 3.
Economics are lagging. When you see prices of eggs, you can see that they've peaked and they're down 40% from their peak, or you look at coffee or orange juice or pork bellies. All of these different prices have melted up and now they're coming down, with the exception of things like gold, platinum, the precious metals. Gold is still on a tear, but that's for other reasons. Soft commodities are getting hit hard. These soft commodities are really input costs. So Fortune 500 companies are going to buy lumber that's cheaper or orange juice that's cheaper and sell it for a higher and higher profit. So the fact that commodities are coming down right now, that means that there's going to be a reversal in the short term with equity prices, because these companies use inputs that are coming down in price, saving them money. So we're in an environment, the Fed has some room. They have room to print money, lower interest rates, do a bunch of different things that weren't available 2-3 years ago. So favorable monetary policy is coming down the pike, paired with favorable crypto regulations.
That the millions of meme coins will probably end up worthless. So when we're talking about the big three, we're talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. The use cases for those are multiplying. And we think they're going to become very important in the years ahead. Meme coins, not so.
There's a lot of parallels that are happening in the dot-com bubble. If you weren't around for the dot-com bubble, there were a ton of different websites that sprung up overnight and received billion-dollar valuations that all eventually went bankrupt. And this is kind of what we're seeing in the crypto market. We're seeing the wheat separated from the chaff.
I really think that this next year will be a huge breakthrough for stablecoin based payments. And we started to see some really interesting market recognition of that opportunity last year. For example, Stripe acquiring Bridge is probably the big moment, but lots of those players, like we're really seeing take up of that use case.
Monica Long states that the stablecoin industry is about to get the next big move. And that's because the Genius Act is coming up. The U.S. is about to regulate the entire stablecoin market. Stablecoins are different than cash because they're issued by the private sector and they take treasuries. Instead of Federal Reserve notes, they're taking treasuries and backing their tokens. This means that it is debt backed. It's debt by the U.S. government that turns tokenized. The way it normally works is the Federal Reserve will issue cash and give it to the government for their treasuries. And this is how cash is created and pushed into the market. So with stable coins, you're no longer utilizing the Federal Reserve and fortifying their balance sheet. Ripple saw the opportunity and created RLUSD that has a side chain connected with Axelar. So what's interesting about this is the side chain is completely EVM compatible. So it can do anything Ethereum can do, but for cheaper fees, all the smart contract capabilities. And then there's a way to connect the results to the XRP ledger. So you have a smart contract executed and the payment goes through the XRP ledger. Now, this is the cheapest, fastest way to move money.
The other thing I should mention is, the composition of our customer base is a lot of businesses that are not in the United States. So places like Asia Pacific, Latin America, certainly Europe and the Middle East. But just taking the first two regions, there's desire for access to US dollars. Like stablecoins, stablecoins are very successful in crypto amongst crypto users and to do any kind of crypto trading. But also just the simple use case of access to US dollars is a really big one. For those reasons, we have been using USD stables in our payment flows in a mix with XRP. So really, it was just recognition that, wow, this is a really big opportunity. There's more and more demand for payments through US dollar stablecoins. Being a provider to companies of that service, it would make sense that we launch our own. And, also a recognition that the stablecoin market has been growing and it's going to balloon even more, especially seeing RWA tokenization on the horizon. It's going to only drive more and more demand for stablecoins.
Monica Long says the stablecoin market's going to balloon, and this is because of real-world assets, tokenized equities, real estate, bonds, all of it's coming on-chain, and it needs to be priced against something. The dollar is the status quo. Another really bullish take on all of this is that Stable coins are the closest thing to a cash leg. So as these regulations come out, that means that banks will be able to exchange their dollars for stable coins because they're regulated and safe. And now you have an entire tokenized economy that's priced against stable coins that can easily migrate from the crypto ecosystem into the fiat system. After the US regulates crypto, you'll see the rest of the world rush into the crypto sector. A lot of times, um, you will see advanced regulations come from other countries, but in the financial world, they really wait for the US to make the first move. So the US is going to set up to make the first move, and then you're going to see countries like England, the UK, different parts of Europe, all jump into the crypto tokenized economy and also have their own stable coin regulations that will allow the cash leg of the euro or the British pound or the peso to be in the tokenized economy. And that's where you'll really see the benefits of XRP take fold, because this is cross currency. Meaning that you have a dollar and you swap it for a peso. That's where XRP's use case comes in.
You may think that the government computers like all talk to each other, they synchronize, they add up what funds are going somewhere, and it's it's coherent. That the numbers, for example, that you're presented as a senator, are actually the real numbers.
One would think.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, they're not totally wrong, but they're probably off by 5% or 10% in some cases. So I call a magic money computer any computer which can just make money out of thin air. That's magic money.
So how does that work?
It just issues payments.
And you said there's something like 11 of these computers at Treasury that are sending out trillions in payments?
They're mostly at Treasury. Some are, but there's some at HHS, there's one or two at State, there's some at DOD. I think we found now 14 magic money computers.
14, okay.
They just send money out of nothing.
With all of this bullish news with the tokenized economy and more use cases for the dollar, you could still have a mad rush away from dollars. You see, technology is neutral. As the U.S. starts to bully and push their weight around the global markets will have more and more options in this tokenized economy. So, trying to prepare for that by getting rid of debts and deficits is a good thing, but it turns out that Russia was sanctioned recently using USDT. They've used various different crypto and stable coins, and Tether froze Russia's wallets. This is more confidence lost in the dollar. And eventually, I think these things pile up, and we don't get rid of the dollar, phase out the dollar completely, but we have a multipolar system. And you may see the BRICS nation opt for digital gold, have some type of tokenized gold commodity. Who knows? But the Western world is also not too thrilled with the dollar as well. I must bring up Mark Carney's synthetic hegemonic currency speak. If you're unfamiliar with this, Mark Carney said at Jackson Hole that all central banks in the G7 or G8 should be nodes and validators on a global blockchain where they mint an SDR type of asset. I asked God for flowers and he gave me rain. When you understand this, everything starts to make sense. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon for ad-free videos, weekly chats, information, and much, much more. Thanks, guys.